Located southeast of mainland Asia in the western Pacific Ocean is the Republic of the Philippines. It is an archipelago of 7,107 beautiful islands grouped into 3 divisions: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. From its majestic mountains and lush rainforests to its crystal clear seas, its outstanding beauty can be seen everywhere. No wonder it's known as the Pearl of the Orient. But behind its beauty, the poverty is striking. It is evident everywhere, especially in the undeveloped provinces. Life is even harder when people get sick. Getting assistance on time is risky and sometimes impossible due to the mountainous terrain in very remote islands. Despite all these difficulties, God has sent help. In 2007, the Philippine Adventist Medical Aviation Services, a faith-based, volunteer-driven organization, was born. It humbly started its work with a 2-seater helicopter, providing emergency medical evacuation in the mountainous and remote regions of Palawan. Working with local churches and assisting ministries like Adventist Frontier Missions, it helped to sustain, advance, and expand the gospel medical missionary work throughout Palawan. After 3 years, that old small helicopter retired, but over the past 6 years, God has indeed blessed Palmas. It has grown and expanded its work to meet the growing needs of the people here in the Philippines through its aviation and medical support.
Seen the head. How long? Just now or?
Just now.
Just now, starting to see the head.
It's almost coming out, but such a browning. When she has
Okay.
the contraction,
Then it comes out.
I can already see the head.
And how many hours has she been in labor?
It started in labor last night, 8
Last
p.m.
night. And then the
of water
yes,
rose is 11:30 a.m.
this morning.
Yeah, this morning.
Okay.
Her contractions were very weak and very irregular. That's why we're worried because
So right now,
Probably 60 to 70% of our flights are emergency medical flights, and these come in through calls from missionaries down in the islands or in the mountains that are working back in these areas. We try to assess, if this is truly an emergency that needs medical evacuation to the hospital, because obviously it's expensive to operate aircraft. Sometimes we'll get calls where it's getting late in the day and we can't fly at night in this country. It's illegal to fly VFR at night. We had a call a few weeks ago that was getting late in the day that I left about 4:30, which I figured was about as late as I could leave and still get back before dark. But in one of the islands down off the south end of Palawan, there was a pregnant lady who was having complications with her delivery. So I flew down there and they were ready and had her waiting to load up in the helicopter, and they just had her laying in a blanket. They kind of slid her into the back seat onto the lap of her husband. I took off and headed back, and she was clearly in labor, but the delivery was not progressing, and every few minutes she'd let out a little cry or something, and I was just praying that we wouldn't have to have a baby delivered in the helicopter on the way back to the hospital.
Okay, maybe here.
Getting kind of in a...
Kaya natin yan.
The Palawano natives in the mountains and around near the mountains have a really poor situation. They have very few resources, and if they have any problems or emergencies, there's really not much that they can do. They'll either just die in the mountains, or if there's some missionaries around that can help them, then they have some hope. They don't even have enough money usually to get to the hospital, so 20, 40 pesos, or $2 to even get a tricycle to get transportation to the hospital. They can't afford that oftentimes. Or if they can afford that, or they can borrow some money, they'll get to the hospital and then they can't afford the medicines. The government hospitals here are very good to the native Palawanos, and those who can't afford, they will provide free rooms and maybe one meal for the patient or the patient's watcher only. The doctor will be free, but any surgeries, any medicines like that aren't available, if the medicines are available, they'll be free, but if they're not available in the hospital, then they have to buy them outside in other pharmacies, and of course it's extremely expensive, so they can't afford that.
Oh, they don't know, they can't speak Tagalog? They can speak Tagalog. There should be one with them. There's one with them that can speak Tagalog. Yeah, sure.
The other problem is they don't always know the language of the lowlands, so they don't know Tagalog necessarily, many of them from the remote areas. So if they go to the hospital, they can't communicate with the doctors and nurses, and they're also discriminated against with their clothing or because they can't speak, and they're treated very poorly by the lowlanders.
Here in Palawan, the groups of people that we're reaching are varied. We have the lowlander, Tagalog-speaking Filipinos. We also are reaching up into the mountain, both with education, but the helicopter medical work, to our native Palawanos. But the airplanes are more often going across the Sulu Sea here and working with the islands that are predominantly Muslim. So it's very overwhelming. Just to know how to reach each group is an ongoing prayer of ours.
Our airplanes are taking patients from, from other islands, but also we have patients here in our house. Every day, sometimes every day, they knock on your door and think that we're doctors. But praise the Lord, we are doctors. All of us are doctors, should be doctors, and using simple remedies. Different kinds of diseases or illness that we're facing. Cough and colds, sometimes TB or hypertension. It's only by God's grace that we can do that.
Most of the flights we make for medical stuff for the indigenous people, they have absolutely no money, and emergency medical evacuation with a helicopter would be thousands of dollars in the U.S., but we don't try to charge anything or expect anything from these people, and God's been faithful in supporting and providing for this method of operating. Some of the stuff we do in the airplanes for the further out areas where people do have money, oftentimes they will give us donations, if we do a medical flight for them. There are some cases where they'll give us donations, a few thousand pesos or whatever they can afford, but when we get, to our destination or to the hospital, we see that they can't even afford that, so we'll just give it back to them and not even worry about it.
When we bring patients in the helicopter from the mountains, or we help some Palawano patient to the hospital, almost always we will be taking complete care of them. So their medicines. Sometimes if they can't understand Tagalog, we'll be translating for them. Sometimes they don't have pots to cook their food, or blankets, sheets, many things that they will need while they're in the hospitals. So we help them with all of those things.
For us to get home, it's 3 hours of hiking on trails about this wide, up on one side, down on the other. Very, very steep, rainy season, very, very slippery. When you come to visit us, you will probably give some blood to accomplish that. Times when it took us 12 hours hauling people out on a stretcher on those kind of trails. And I mean, when I'm asked that question, I think of Kundar. He was our next door neighbor. I really liked Kundar. He was an old man, but you know, he's just a good guy, good neighbor. And we were gone, and he got sick, and he had nowhere to go, so he started hiking out of the mountains to get to the hospital. And he made it out of the mountains all the way to the lowlands and died right there. And I just think if somebody had been there, that he could be alive today. And then you add to that we have work that we're trying to do, 12 hours hike farther into the mountains, and actually we had to close down that work because when people got sick there, it was so difficult to get them out. It was just almost impossible.
You get back into some of these mountainous areas in this country, and there's indigenous or native Filipinos living back in these areas. There's still some completely isolated from the outside world. There's still a number of tribal groups that have not been touched or entered at all by people from the lowlands or missionaries or anyone. And they're still living, you know, very primitively, just subsisting, and very ignorant, dirty, sick, huge amount of health problems. And here in Palawan, malaria is a big problem.
We also see that the physical needs is not enough. That's not all that people need. Oftentimes, you know, we can help them with their physical needs, but so oftentimes they'll have spiritual problems, or they'll have fighting amongst their family members or their neighbors, and they don't know how to take care of these things. And so we also try to help them with their spiritual needs.
We desired to see the whole Philippines, you know, covered with air support. That would mean having 4 or 5 air bases with a helicopter and maybe an airplane at each base.
And now, with the helicopter, 1 hour on foot is equal 1 minute in the helicopter. I mean, we can go places and do things, you know, medical emergencies. It can make the difference between life and death. There's no doubt about that. That we can get somebody out of the mountains, we can get them to the hospital quickly, efficiently, without the trauma of hauling them on these steep trails. To me, it's really neat to see technology, which very often is used for just rich people, but to have it being used for aiding the poorest of the poor and forwarding the work of God and giving that privilege to people who would otherwise never have it. To be saving lives, to be taking the gospel, what a fantastic chance to do that.
It would be very hard for us without the presence of PAMAS, because we can only transport patients here by sea. So we would like to thank the PAMAS family and the service that we have been looking forward to for so long, and now it is within our reach.
During the rest of the year, the ships do go, but very sporadically. So when it comes to medical emergencies, the only way to access these people, give them the care that they need, is by air. But I have to say, even though the dangers are real, the most rewarding part is when the head doctor from the island texts me and says, "Sean, the baby lived," or "the mother lived." Some of the passengers will text me themselves and they'll say, "Praise God, Last time my wife took the ship and our baby died. This time she rode the airplane and I have a son. So even though the dangers are real and what we have to face out here in this tropical weather over this ocean is challenging, but when we know lives are being saved, there's a reward that comes from that offsets any of the challenges that we face.
There's a big need to get in and to reach these people with the gospel, and also with health education, with different things that'll improve their lives and lead them hopefully to be saved eternally as well.